George Hislop is probably the first municipal candidate in Canada to run openly as a homosexual. In Toronto, that's not necessarily a disadvantage. Metropolitan Toronto, with its population of about 2.3 million, probably has 200,000 to 300,000 homosexuals. Hislop was expected to become alderman for his ward in the central part of the city, where there's been a boom lately in shops, bars, and other businesses catering specifically to gay tastes. But the issues spread far wider than the one small ward where he was running, and last night those issues helped defeat not only George Hislop, but also Mayor John Sewell, who had supported him.
I have said that I am not the gay candidate. I'm not running to represent gay people. I'm the candidate who is gay. And part of it is involved in myth destruction. You know, I'm human. I'm interested in Toronto. I'm interested in what goes on in this city.
Hislop broke the political ice for the homosexual community last night, and although he found the waters cold, his defeat was just close enough to leave him with hope for the future.
The amount of love that is being shown towards me and towards the people who worked on our campaign and towards our community, Ward 6, has been overwhelming. It has vastly outweighed the hate that we've seen demonstrated.
For his supporters, it is only the beginning of campaigns to come. This part of downtown Toronto is the heart of the gay community. There's a greater concentration of homosexuals living here than in any other part of Canada. And George Hislop has been their unofficial mayor for over 10 years. An estimated 50,000 gay voters live here, and their new openness after years of silence gives them a voice that politicians cannot ignore. The homosexual community here has become visible enough to sponsor fairs celebrating the gay lifestyle. There are upwards of 40 gay service clubs and at least 85 businesses in a gay chamber of commerce that vie for $1 billion worth of purchasing power.
Stop! Stop police harassment! Stop!
Clashes with the law have put some gays into the streets, demanding that the police leave them in peace. As more homosexuals seek to be included in human rights legislation, George Hislop's campaign was seen as a test of straight society's willingness to accept them as just one more minority in the Toronto mosaic. Throughout his campaign, Hislop tried to play down the gay issue, running instead as a reform politician concerned about daycare, housing, and the preservation of neighborhoods. But his style was a bit cramped by a criminal charge hanging over his head. As a 10% shareholder in the Barracks, a steam bath catering to homosexuals, Hislop was charged with keeping a common bawdy house when police raided it 2 years ago. Hislop also owns a trendy Toronto restaurant that caters to both straights and gays, while a bar at the back offers an atmosphere where gays only can cruise and be by themselves. Sitting over early morning coffee, Hislop explained why places like this are important to homosexuals.
If I went into a straight disco and danced with my lover, I'd have some burly bouncer saying, "And just what do you think you're doing?" You know? So when you're not welcome in a place, you create your own places where you can relax and do your thing. Our attitude towards our bodies and towards sex and sexuality is perhaps a bit different. We don't view, many of us I should say, don't view sex as dirty and as sinful. But the people have been really quite nice.
Hislop's own private life belies the swinging image promoted in his business establishments. For 22 years, he's lived quietly with graphic artist Ron Shearer, and their Sunday morning breakfast scene might seem oddly familiar to any political household.
I see they're calling you the unofficial mayor again, George.
The gay mayor thing?
Yeah.
I told someone the other day that I really didn't like the title. That I'd been a queen for years now. I wasn't going to be demoted to be merely an unofficial gay mayor.
It's 6 minutes past 8 o'clock, and here's how things looked at Exmouth this morning. John Sewell has many flaws, but I never suspected he had a death wish. Why else would he engage in a political alliance with George Hislop?
During the campaign, Toronto's mayor insisted that gay power politics had nothing to do with his support for Hislop. He happened to like his platform. But Sewell's opponents linked it to the mayor's high-profile defense of gay rights almost 2 years ago when he spoke to a cheering crowd of Toronto homosexuals.
It would be an extremely helpful gesture at this point if the provincial government were to amend the Human Rights Code to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation across the province.
How have you felt personally about the attacks that have been made on you in some of the newspapers that have virtually implied that you are a homosexual?
Well, I mean, one is never very happy about any form of bigotry or hate-mongering. And some of at least one newspaper in Toronto has been better at that than most others. But that happens to be the nature of society, unfortunately. And if that's the cost of some people sticking up for some other people, well, I'm glad I'm one of those who's paying part of the cost.
In going around knocking on door to door, I have been very...
At neighborhood meetings, most heterosexual voters seemed more interested in parking problems than the candidate's sexual preferences. But Hislop was constantly dogged by a determined anti-gay lobby who inevitably raised the gay issue and the matter of the criminal charges against him.
Yes, Mr. Hislop, I'm a follower of Christ, and I don't know, is it true that there were chains and whips and that type of thing found in the barracks? Because if so...
Madam, you will have to wait until we go to trial to find out.
Okay, but if that's the case, then...
And I would like to say to you that if you are a follower of Christ, do you believe this garbage that Ken Campbell is putting out, that the League Against Homosexuals is putting out, all in the name of your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? I find this very offensive. I believe in separation of church and state. I believe in freedom of religion, but I also believe in freedom from religion.
Okay, but
There is a militant, radical fringe of the homosexual community which is bent on making the world their bedroom in a crusade to impose their acquired sexual disorientation on the public as a normal alternative.
Ken Campbell is the evangelical preacher who heads up a fundamentalist pro-family organization that's tangled with school boards and hospital abortion committees across the country. Campbell is an old hand at battling homosexuals.
Good morning.
2 years ago, he brought Anita Bryant to Toronto to crusade against gays.
I stand for and what I believe, and
any time the issue surfaces, he empties out the churches for a protest rally.
Let me begin by backgrounding the circumstances and events which have led to the establishment of Metro's moderate majority.
Many of Campbell's crusaders don't live in Toronto itself. They're from the suburbs and small towns, and they stand foursquare against the wickedness that lies in the heart of the city.
Andy Kunster is here representing liberated homosexuals.
There's also a Toronto jeweler who says he was raped as a child by a homosexual. They call homosexuality a cancerous growth, and during the election campaign, targeted Sewell, Hislop, and 9 school trustees as threats to family life. Campbell himself doesn't live in Toronto. He's 70 kilometers away in the rural community of Halton, but he's concerned enough to organize a nationwide movement if necessary. Are you saying that if a homosexual, a person who is a homosexual, runs for office, they shouldn't tell people about it?
I'm saying that there are aspects of one's personal life which ought to be kept private. There's something weird, it seems to me almost, about inflicting upon the public your personal preferences in the bedroom, for example, as Mr. Hislop is doing, and that right off the bat suggests that he probably lacks in a judgmental capacity to handle leadership of a multicultural society.
The KKK, the capital K Christians. Yes, they're coming out of the woodwork now, and some of the hate literature that's being distributed is quite remarkable. But it's exactly the same stuff. You strike out the words queer, faggot, homosexual, and insert Jew, whatever. You know, it's the same material. You just change the cast of characters.
And Mrs. Fiona Nelson, nor any school board trustee who voted to allow these people in their schools.
But the gay issue really exploded during the election campaign when the anti-gay forces had a knockdown confrontation with the Toronto School Board.
I cannot tolerate this. I cannot tolerate this.
At the urging of Hislop and other homosexuals, the trustees were considering a motion to establish a liaison committee with the gay community.
And heartless take the name of a Christian loving God to get their evil decisions across.
Come outside and say that.
Then,
come outside.
sir?
Say that. Come on.
I've got 15,000 votes.
Armed with 15,000 signatures, a crowd of angry parents raked board members over the coals of damnation.
I'm rather amused that the capital K Christians hold up the King James Bible and say, it's all in here, never knowing that King James was a homosexual, you know, because they won't allow it to be taught in schools. We mustn't talk about who is homosexual, you know. The reason they don't want me in the schools is that you can't teach the kids that the moon is made of green cheese if you've got an astronaut standing in the classroom.
The motion to establish a committee went down to defeat, but Ken Campbell and his followers are still fuming that the board will stick to a policy that bans discrimination against anyone in the school system because of their sexual orientation.
Do we have a legal opinion as to what we mean by sexual orientation? Does this mean sex with the dogs, sex with the children? And are we to say that if it is known that a teacher is openly into sex with dogs or sex with children, that there must be no discrimination?
As chairman of the school board, Fiona Nelson was very opposed to the motion for a gay liaison committee, but she stands firmly behind the policy of no discrimination. She finds Campbell's objections impossible to deal with.
Are that he doesn't understand what he's talking about. And secondly, a person's sexual orientation or private sexual practices are private. And as long as he isn't going around with sandwich boards on saying that it's terrific to make love to dogs, how on earth are we going to know that that's what the person does? Obviously, a person who has that kind of bent is perhaps going to have some other problems. And when we are hiring people, we're going to hire the most competent, stable, mature people that we can. But people who have private kinks, whether they're homosexual or heterosexual, I don't see how I would possibly know about that.
The outcry over the schools issue shows that Torontonians have mixed emotions about how far to take the gay rights issue, yet many would shrink from the politics of Ken Campbell. A lot of these petitions that came flooding into the Toronto School Board came from outside the city, from Manitoba, from Alberta, and even from Northern Ireland. They indicate that there is a fundamentalist movement in Canada similar to the organized moral majority movement in the United States, which last week helped to orchestrate the defeat of Liberal senators. But for now, Ken Campbell and his Canadian movement have focused in on the issue of homosexuality, and they intend to keep up the pressure on any politician who supports that cause.
Lesbians and gay
It's not a battle George Hislop will shrink from.
We're in government now. We're in positions of leadership. And we're mandarins and, you know, we're everywhere. But we're not visible. And of course the fear is that if you make yourself visible, you'll be out. I'm saying that visibility doesn't matter.
Even though visibility did seem to matter yesterday, Hislop showed no regrets for the stand he'd taken.
I still think that it's very important to destroy the closet. Honesty is the best policy, that to be up front, and maybe we're not ready for that.